The quiet little town of Cedar Hills was exactly the place Aubrey had hoped it would be. A peaceful escape from the noise of her old life, the bustle of the city, and most importantly, the lingering ache of her recent breakup. She had packed her life into a few boxes and moved into a small cottage on the edge of town, hoping to find some clarity and maybe, just maybe, a fresh start. It had been 6 months since her relationship ended, but the pain still clung to her like a shadow. She had thought love was supposed to bring comfort, safety, and happiness. Instead, it had left her feeling hollow and uncertain about her future. Now, the only companionship she had was her sketchbook and her long walks through the quiet park near her house. It was enough, for now. Or so she thought. One afternoon, while walking through the park, the soft pitter-patter of rain started to fall, coating the vibrant orange leaves in a shimmering gloss. Aubrey had just turned toward the path home when she noticed something. A flash of golden fur darting behind the trees. Her heart skipped a beat. There, sitting under a large oak tree, was a scruffy golden retriever, drenched and trembling slightly. His soulful brown eyes seemed to plead with her. He was alone. Aubrey knelt down and extended her hand slowly. "Hey there, buddy," she said softly. The dog cautiously approached, sniffing her hand before giving her fingers a tentative lick. He had no collar, no tag, nothing to indicate who he belonged to. "Where's your owner?" she wondered aloud, but the dog just wagged his tail as if happy to have found some company. Aubrey knew she couldn't leave him out in the rain, so she made a quick decision. "All right, I guess you're coming home with me." She led him back to her cottage, where she dried him off with an old towel and gave him some leftover chicken. He eagerly devoured it before curling up by the fireplace, looking perfectly at home. For the first time in weeks, Aubrey felt a spark of warmth in her chest. The next morning, Aubrey set about trying to find the dog's owner. She printed flyers with his picture and posted them around town. She put up a notice online and even called the local animal shelters, but no one had reported a missing dog. Days passed, and still, no one came forward. In the meantime, Aubrey had grown attached to the dog, who she had named Charlie. He was affectionate, always by her side, and seemed to have a calming presence that helped fill the quiet in her home. But as much as she loved having Charlie around, she knew she had to find out where he truly belonged. A week later, as Aubrey was making dinner, her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize. "Hello?" she answered. "Hi, is this the woman who found the lost golden retriever?" The voice on the other end was formal, almost businesslike. "Yes, that's me," Aubrey replied. "Are you his owner?" "Not exactly," the woman said, "but I'm calling on behalf of someone who is. Could you bring the dog to Westside Veterinary Clinic tomorrow morning?" Aubrey frowned. Something about the situation seemed off. "Why can't the owner come pick him up here? I mean, I've had him for over a week." "I understand," the woman said, her tone softening slightly. "But Dr. Michael Grant is a private individual. He prefers to avoid public attention. It's important that you bring the dog to him." Aubrey didn't know what to make of it. She had no idea who Michael Grant was, but curiosity got the better of her. The next morning, she packed Charlie into her car and drove to the upscale veterinary clinic in the neighboring town. The clinic was spotless and modern, far more extravagant than any Aubrey had ever seen. She sat in the waiting room with Charlie, feeling out of place amidst the marble floors and pristine decor. After a few minutes, the receptionist called her name. As she entered the examination room, Aubrey was met by a tall man in his early 30s, wearing a simple button-down shirt and slacks. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, and his piercing blue eyes carried a serious, almost weary look. He was undeniably handsome, but there was a distance about him, like a man with walls built high. "I'm Dr. Michael Grant," he said, extending a hand. "Thank you for finding my dog." Aubrey shook his hand, feeling a slight jolt of surprise at the firmness of his grip. "I didn't realize he was yours," she said, glancing at Charlie, who wagged his tail enthusiastically at his real owner. "Why wasn't he wearing a tag?" Michael sighed. Privacy reasons. I prefer to keep my personal life separate from my work. Charlie has a way of attracting attention. There was a heaviness in his voice, one that made Aubrey curious, but she didn't pry. You've taken good care of him, Michael added, kneeling to stroke Charlie's head. There was a flicker of warmth in his eyes as he looked at the dog. I owe you for that. No need for a reward, Aubrey said quickly, standing awkwardly by the door. I'm just glad he's back with you. Before she could leave, Michael spoke again. If you're not in a rush, I'd like to buy you a coffee, as a thank you. Surprised, Aubrey hesitated. There was something about him, his guarded demeanor, the way he seemed weighed down by something unseen, that intrigued her. Against her usual instincts, she agreed. At a nearby cafe, Aubrey and Michael sat across from each other, the clinking of mugs and quiet murmur of conversations filling the air. They started with small talk, but soon the conversation drifted to deeper subjects. Aubrey learned that Michael was a highly regarded surgeon, living in the neighboring town, but he had become somewhat of a recluse after a tragedy 2 years earlier. His fiancée had been killed in a car accident, and since then, he had focused almost exclusively on his work, shutting out much of the outside world. That's why I keep to myself, Michael explained, stirring his coffee. I've had enough attention, enough loss. Aubrey felt a pang of empathy. She understood the pain of loss, though hers had been different. Her breakup had left her heartbroken, but it hadn't been final like his. Still, they both knew what it was like to feel lost, to feel like the ground had been pulled out from beneath them. They talked for hours, long after their cups had emptied. By the end of the afternoon, something had shifted between them, a connection that neither had expected. Over the next few weeks, Aubrey and Michael found themselves crossing paths more often. Sometimes it was intentional. Michael would invite her for coffee after his shifts, or Aubrey would take Charlie for a walk when Michael was at work. Other times it seemed like fate, as if they were being drawn to one another. Charlie, of course, was always a part of it, happily trotting between them, the unspoken link that had brought them together. But just as their relationship started to blossom into something more, Michael began pulling away. A journalist had started sniffing around, looking for a story about the handsome surgeon with the tragic past. And Michael feared that Aubrey would be dragged into his unwanted spotlight. I don't want to hurt you, Michael confessed one night. I don't want my past, my life, to become a burden for you. Aubrey felt her heart tighten. But you're not a burden, Michael. We've both been hurt, but we've also helped each other. You're the first person who's made me feel not so lost anymore. Michael looked into her eyes, torn between his fear and the undeniable connection they shared. In the end, love won over fear. Michael realized that shutting himself off from the world had only left him lonelier, and Aubrey had helped him see that happiness was still possible, if only he was brave enough to embrace it. Together they faced the challenges, the media attention, and their lingering pasts. Aubrey found herself healing from her own heartbreak, while Michael began to open up again, letting go of the pain he had carried for so long. In the quiet town of Cedar Hills, their love story grew, and with Charlie by their side, they built a life filled with warmth, joy, and new beginnings. As winter descended on Cedar Hills, Aubrey and Michael walked hand in hand through the snow-covered park. Charlie ran ahead, chasing snowflakes, his golden fur bright against the white backdrop. Aubrey turned to Michael and smiled. You know, finding Charlie was the best thing that ever happened to me. Michael brushed a snowflake from her cheek and smiled back. Funny how losing him led me to find you. And as the snow gently fell around them, they knew they had both found what they had been searching for all along: love, healing, and the promise of happiness.